Good afternoon, dual enrollment students. I'm going to do a lecture on Chapter 7 via screen recording, so you can play this on your own, start and stop as you need to. And this is going to go over Part 2. So first we're going to talk about the land policy. So John Jay and Pinckney's treaty that we talked about a little bit earlier renewed the interest in moving west. And you can say that this was the beginning of Manifest Destiny. It also divided party lines, just like most of everything, between the Federalists and the Republicans as well. So the Federalists, they wanted to build up the East with population because they wanted most of the party's influence to be in the East. In addition, they wanted to make prices for land out west higher in order to help fund the Treasury. So they really wanted to sell the government and federal lands for a higher price to larger parcels to speculators via than just the everyday Joe. So the Republicans, they went along with it because they knew that they needed to increase money for the Treasury. However, they were more inclined to offer the land to the masses rather than large parcels to speculators. So what we see happen is we get the Land Act of 1796, which is mostly focused towards large parcels, towards speculators. So Congress extended the rectangular surveys of land that had been accepted back in 1785, and they were going to sell the land at $2 per acre, with tracts of land that were 640 acres at being the very minimum. So most everyday people could not afford this at this time. Later on, they did enact the Land Act of 1800 because the Land Act of 1796 made land far beyond the means of what most farmers could pay. So the Land Act of 1800 actually revised 1796 by saying that 320 acres was the minimum, and they could make a down payment instead of full payment if possible. So to go out west, what we see building here is the Wilderness Road, which was created by Daniel Boone. And what he did is he expanded an already Native American trail between the Appalachian Mountains, known as Cumberland Gap, and opened what has since now become the Wilderness Road. So this allowed for easier access to the backcountry and for the flow people from east to west. And he did this very gradually. So Washington has decided that he does not want to continue being in office. He gave a farewell speech in September of 1796, and he basically said that you need to forget about these political parties because it's just going to cause more issues for the country. And he also said, you need to avoid getting into any alliances with foreign nations. Some of the successes he has seen in his presidency is that he established a national government that had power. Secondly, he secured the national credit. Third, he did recover territory from Britain and Spain that had been lost. He stabilized the northwestern frontier for westward movement, and 3 states were brought into the Union, which is Vermont in 1791, Kentucky in 1792, and Tennessee in 1796. So in all 3 of the elections prior to the one in 1804 for president, the candidate with the second highest number of votes would then become president. So the election of 1796 and the election of 1800, they still have 2 people run for president, vice president, and the one who gets the most votes is the one who becomes president. So after 1800 election, they stopped that. So in the 1796 election, John Adams would be nominated with Pinckney. And for the Republicans, it would be Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And Adams would win the presidency, and Thomas Jefferson would become the vice president because he had the most votes. So again, I want to reiterate that this was discontinued after 1800. So it was one of the few times in our country where we saw a president and a vice president of 2 different parties. So during Adams' administration, he inherited the war with France, and it was more like a quasi-war. It was an undeclared war, and this is where over 300 American ships had been plundered by French ships, and the United States had broken off all diplomatic relations with its former ally. So, in an effort to prevent a declared war, Adams sent a delegation to France to seek a diplomatic end. Now, prior to this, what we see is a private citizen in 1798 named George Logan actually went over there himself without any authorization from the government to negotiate peace with French. What he did do is he did secure release of some of the American seamen, and he also secured the assurance that American diplomats and negotiators would be welcome in France. However, what it did eventually get passed is what's called the Logan Act, and it's still in effect today that no citizen can go over to any foreign nation and negotiate any type of things for the government without official authorization. So, we now going back to the government sending over a delegation to settle diplomatic end to this quasi-war. So before the delegation was going to meet with their French counterparts, 3 French officials, who Adams said named them as XYZ in his report to Congress, demanded a bribe before they would gain an audience. And during this time, this was something that was fairly common to do. So it wasn't outrageous at the time. However, when this became known in the United States, it was very seen as a very bad thing to do. And so the people in the United States wanted war with France, and French officials decided, oh, this is a really big mistake, and they didn't realize what it would mean for them. So they went ahead and apologized. And so prior to this, there wasn't a navy, because after the revolution, they didn't see any reason to have a navy. But when they were having problems with Algerian pirates in 1794, they authorized the building of 6 ships. And so this is when we see the beginning of a navy for the United States. And prior to the Convention of 1800, they did come to an understanding between France and the United States. So America would not get any money back for any of the confiscated issues. However, what France would do is that they would no longer interact with them in a naval war. And also, they said that the prior alliance that they made during the American Revolution was now off the table, and so the Americans didn't have to worry about being perpetual allies with France anymore after this. So they did get something out of the negotiations with the peacemakers. So what does war at home look like during this quasi-war with France? So to counteract what was conceived of as Republican attempts to undermine his presidency, Adams signed the following acts that I'm going to talk about, which are called the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798 altogether. There are 4 acts. We have the Naturalization Act, which changed the time period necessary to become a citizen from 5 to 14 years of residency. We have the Alien Act, which empowered the presidency with the ability to deport any dangerous aliens that they saw. And the Alien Enemies Act was designed to repel from American enemy aliens at will during time of war. So they could send anybody that was considered an enemy during times of war. And then we have the Sedition Act, which forbade writing, publishing, or speaking ill of the government or any of its officers. And Kentucky and Virginia really saw that as a problem, and they considered it unconstitutional. But the federal justice is constitutional, and so they waved that away. However, the southern states felt that the Constitution was a compact among states, so states can say whether the Congress has exceeded its powers. And so this was the beginning that we first see nullification come up. And we'll see this come up time and time again, where there are certain states that feel that states should have more power and also say what laws apply to them and which don't. They didn't go ahead and nullify this. They did appeal to other states to bring this up to be as unconstitutional. And this sort of just kind of petered away because we see it rolling into the election of 1800. So the election of 1800 was the last time that we saw people run on a ballot for Democratic, Republicans, and Federalists. And whoever gets the most votes becomes president, and whoever gets the next highest votes would be vice president. And this is the last time we see of this. So in the election of 1800, no candidate won a majority of the Electoral College. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr actually tied. And so in accordance with the Constitution, the election was then thrown into the House of Representatives. So at this time, at the beginning of the election, the Federalists are not looking so good. Adams is more popular than his party. The Federalists are seen poorly because they felt like people were being taxed for the unneeded army. They're upset about the Alien Sedition Acts, which makes them feel that the Federalist Party is more about anti-liberty, and so fears of monarchy is brought up again. And also they are against Hamilton's economic programs that we talked about earlier. So we have Adams and Pinckney running for the Federalists and Jefferson and Burr running for the Democratic Republicans. Adams is more popular, as I said, in his party. He actually gets 65 of the electoral votes, and then Jefferson and Burr get 73 of the electoral votes. So then it gets thrown into the House, like I said before, but the House kept on deadlocking, and they did this for like 35 ballots. So 35 votes kept on deadlocking. So then Jefferson, he wants the presidency of vote, and so he told a Delaware congressman that if he becomes president, he wouldn't just remove all Federalists that are appointed to federal offices, and he would uphold all of Hamilton's financial policies. So then the deadlock was ended, and so Jefferson became the president and Aaron Burr was the vice president because he had the next votes. Prior to leaving office, Adams passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which would ensure the Federals' control of the judicial system. And what it basically said is that with the next removal or the next vacancy of the Supreme Court, it would not be filled. He also created 16 circuit courts, as well as numerous marshal clerks and circuit offices throughout the United States. So instead of putting a new judge into the Supreme Court, they created the Chief Justice position, and Adams put in the Federalist John Marshall. And so that is the end of Chapter 7 notes. You will need to do a summary of Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 together. The summary should be anywhere from 5 to 10 lines, and it needs to summarize both Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. And that is the end.